Imagine waking up one morning to discover that every advanced civilization in the galaxy has gone silent. No communications, no signals, no signs of life. The mighty Zephyrian Empire with their crystal cities spanning 3 star systems, gone. The ancient Korati, masters of quantum technology who had existed for millions of years, vanished. The proud Vectani warrior clans who had never lost a battle, wiped out completely. But here's the terrifying part. It wasn't war that destroyed them. It wasn't natural disaster or cosmic catastrophe. It was something far worse. A plague so devastating that it consumed entire worlds in days, leaving nothing but empty shells of once great civilizations. And somehow, impossibly, humanity, the species every other race had dismissed as primitive, weak and insignificant, remained completely untouched.
What makes humans so special?
What cosmic joke or cruel twist of fate left the galaxy's most underestimated species as the sole survivors of an extinction event that claimed every other intelligent life form? The answer lies not in humanity's strength, but in something far more unexpected, something that every advanced civilization had long ago abandoned, but humans clung to with stubborn determination. This is the story of how humanity's greatest weakness became their ultimate salvation, and how the last species standing had to choose between remaining safe in isolation or venturing into the dark, empty galaxy to uncover the truth about the plague that consumed everything except them. Captain Sarah Chen stared at the display screen in complete disbelief. The massive communication array aboard the Earth Defense Station had been scanning the galaxy for 3 weeks straight, searching for any sign of the civilizations that had once filled the cosmos with their chatter, their trade negotiations, their diplomatic messages, and their cultural exchanges. Now there was nothing but an eerie silence that seemed to press against her skull like a physical weight. "Run the scan again," she ordered her communications officer, Lieutenant Marcus Webb. Her voice carried the exhaustion of someone who had been hoping against hope for weeks, only to be disappointed over and over again. Webb's fingers danced across the holographic interface, his movements precise despite the tremor in his hands. The young officer had been one of the first to notice the communication blackout 3 weeks ago, when the regular diplomatic channels from the Zephyrian Empire had suddenly cut off mid-transmission. At first, they had assumed it was a technical malfunction, or perhaps some kind of solar interference affecting long-range communications. "Same result, Captain," Webb reported, his voice barely above a whisper. "Complete radio silence across all known frequencies. No subspace communications, no quantum entanglement signals, no hyperspace relay transmissions. It's like they all just stopped talking at exactly the same time." Sarah walked over to the massive viewport that dominated the command deck of the station. Earth hung below them like a blue marble, peaceful and beautiful, completely unaware of the cosmic mystery that had gripped its defenders. The irony was not lost on her that humanity, a species that had only achieved faster-than-light travel 50 years ago, might now be the only voice left in what had once been a chattering galaxy of thousands of different civilizations. "What about the automated systems?" she asked, turning back to her crew. Surely some of their navigation beacons or warning buoys would still be functioning even if their main civilizations went dark. Lieutenant Commander Alex Rodriguez, her chief science officer, looked up from his workstation with grim news written across his weathered face. "That's just it, Captain. Even the automated systems have gone silent. The Karate Quantum Lighthouse that's been broadcasting navigational data for over 2 million years just stopped. The Vectani border warning systems that have been active for centuries are completely dead. It's not just their civilizations that have gone quiet, it's everything they ever built." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The implications were staggering. These weren't just communication failures or technical problems. This suggested something far more catastrophic had occurred across the galaxy, something that had affected not just biological life, but also the vast technological infrastructure that these ancient civilizations had built over millions of years. "Sir," came a nervous voice from the sensor station. Ensign David Park, barely out of the academy, was staring at his readings with wide eyes. "I'm picking up something unusual from the Proxima sector. It's not a communication signal, but there's definitely some kind of energy signature." Sarah's heart jumped. Any sign of activity in the dead galaxy was worth investigating. "What kind of energy signature?" It's hard to describe," Park said, adjusting his instruments. "It's not like anything in our databases. It seems to be some kind of biological energy pattern, but it's massive. Whatever is generating it would have to be the size of a small moon." Rodriguez quickly pulled up the sensor data on the main display. The energy signature appeared as a pulsing, organic-looking wave that seemed to be moving slowly through space. Unlike the clean, geometric patterns of known alien technology, this looked almost alive. Could it be a ship? Sarah asked. Maybe survivors from one of the civilizations trying to signal for help? I don't think so, Rodriguez replied, his scientific training making him cautious. The pattern is too regular, too rhythmic. It almost looks like a heartbeat, but scaled up to an incredible size. And there's something else. The energy signature seems to be consuming small asteroids and space debris as it moves. The bridge fell silent as everyone processed this information. Sarah had been in command of the Earth Defense Station for 5 years, and in that time she had dealt with first contact protocols, trade disputes, and even a few minor skirmishes with hostile species, but nothing in her training had prepared her for this scenario. Captain, Webb spoke up from his station, I'm receiving a priority transmission from Earth Command. Admiral Harrison wants to speak with you immediately. Sarah nodded and activated the secure communication channel. Admiral James Harrison's familiar face appeared on the screen, but she could see the strain of the past few weeks written in the lines around his eyes and the tension in his jaw. Sarah, the Admiral began without preamble, what's the situation up there? Still nothing, sir, Sarah reported. Complete communication blackout from all known alien civilizations. However, we have detected an unusual energy signature in the Proxima sector that might warrant investigation. Harrison nodded grimly. We've been monitoring similar reports from our other deep space stations. The President has called an emergency session of the Global Council. The world's leaders are demanding answers we simply don't have. Sir, what are your orders? Sarah asked, though she dreaded the answer. She had a feeling that whatever had happened to the other civilizations, humanity was about to find itself thrust into a situation they were completely unprepared for. We're organizing an expedition, Harrison said. 3 of our most advanced exploration vessels are being prepared for a deep space reconnaissance mission. Your job is to coordinate with the other defense stations and maintain a protective perimeter around Earth while we figure out what the hell happened out there. Admiral, Rodriguez interjected. If I may, sir. Based on our preliminary analysis of the energy signatures we're detecting, I strongly recommend extreme caution. Whatever caused the extinction of these civilizations may still be active.
Harrison's expression grew even more grave.
That's exactly what we're afraid of, Commander. The question is whether we stay hidden and hope it doesn't find us, or whether we go out there and try to understand what we're dealing with.
Sarah understood the dilemma. Humanity had always been considered one of the weakest species in the galactic community. Their technology was centuries behind the major powers. Their military capabilities were laughable compared to warrior races like the Vectani, and their scientific understanding was primitive compared to ancient civilizations like the Korathi. For decades, humanity had survived through diplomacy, trade, and by staying out of the way of the more powerful species. Now, suddenly, they might be the only survivors of some galactic catastrophe. The responsibility was overwhelming.
Sir, Sarah said.
What do we know about the timeline? When did the first civilizations go silent? That's one of the most disturbing aspects of this whole situation.
Harrison replied.
Based on our records, it appears that different civilizations went dark over a period of several months, but the pattern doesn't make sense. The Zephyrians, who were closest to the galactic core, went silent first, then the Korathi, who were in the Outer Rim territories, then the Vectani, who were in the middle sectors. It's not spreading in any logical pattern based on distance or galactic location. Rodriguez frowned at his data panels. That suggests the cause isn't something physical spreading through space at sublight speeds. It would have to be something that can affect civilizations instantaneously across vast distances. Could it be some kind of weapon? Park asked nervously. If it is, Harrison said, it's beyond anything we've ever encountered or imagined. The energy requirements alone would be staggering. Sarah walked back to the viewport and looked out at the peaceful stars. Somewhere out there, in the vast darkness, lay the answers to questions that would determine humanity's fate. Were they truly alone now? Was whatever had destroyed the other civilizations coming for Earth next? Or was there something about humanity that made them immune to whatever cosmic plague had consumed the galaxy? Admiral, she said, turning back to the communication screen, when do the reconnaissance missions launch? 72 hours, Harrison replied. Captain Reynolds will command the expedition aboard the UES Endeavour with the Prometheus and the Discovery as support vessels. Your station will serve as their communication relay point and fallback position. Understood, sir. We'll be ready. After Harrison ended the transmission, the bridge remained quiet for several minutes. Sarah could feel the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her crew. They were military personnel, trained to face known threats and follow established protocols. But this situation was unlike anything in their training manuals. Captain, Webb said quietly, what do you think happened to them? Sarah looked around at her crew. Young, dedicated people who had signed up to protect Earth from known threats, not to serve as humanity's last line of defense against an unknown cosmic horror. I don't know, she admitted. But we're going to find out. And whatever it is, we're going to make sure it doesn't happen to us. As she spoke those words, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere in the dark spaces between the stars, something was watching. Something that had already claimed every other intelligent species in the galaxy, and was now turning its attention to the small blue world that had somehow escaped its notice. The silence of space had never felt so threatening. Captain Michael Reynolds gripped the armrests of his command chair as the UES Endeavour dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Zephyrian home system. What greeted them was not the bustling hub of interstellar commerce and crystal cities that had dominated this region of space for over 10,000 years. Instead, they found themselves staring at a system that looked like a cosmic graveyard. Jesus Christ, whispered Commander Elena Vasquez, his first officer, as the main view screen displayed the remnants of what had once been the most magnificent civilization in the known galaxy. The 3 crystal worlds that had housed over 50 billion Zephyrians were still there, but they looked wrong. Where once massive crystal spires had reached toward the heavens, creating rainbow refractions that could be seen from orbit, now there was only a sickly, pulsing darkness that seemed to consume light rather than reflect it. Sensors are picking up massive organic structures covering the entire surface of Zephyria Prime, reported Lieutenant Commander James Foster, the ship's science officer. The readings are unprecedented. It's like the entire planet has been consumed by some kind of living organism. Reynolds felt his stomach clench. The Zephyrians had been humanity's first contact with alien intelligence, and despite their initial condescension toward the younger species, they had eventually become trusted allies and trading partners. The thought that their entire civilization had been wiped out was devastating enough, but the idea that their worlds had been literally consumed by some alien organism was horrifying. What about life signs? Reynolds asked, hoping against hope that there might be survivors hiding somewhere in the organic mass that had overtaken the planet. Foster worked his controls for several minutes, running deep scans of the planetary surface. I'm detecting massive biological activity, but nothing that matches known Zephyrian life signs. Whatever is covering the planet is alive, but it's not Zephyrian. It's not like anything in our databases. Sir, called out Lieutenant Sarah Kim from the communications station. I'm picking up some kind of signal from the planet. It's very faint, but it's definitely artificial. Reynolds felt a spark of hope. Zephyrian? No, sir. It's human. The bridge fell silent. There was no way a human signal should be coming from the Zephyrian homeworld. No human ships had visited this system in over 6 months, and the Zephyrians had never allowed permanent human settlements on their worlds. Are you certain? Reynolds asked. Kim double-checked her instruments. Positive, sir. It's a standard human emergency beacon, but the signal is coming from inside the organic mass on the planet's surface. Reynolds made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Take us into orbit. I want a full sensor sweep of that signal's origin point. Sir, Vasquez said quietly, shouldn't we report back to Earth first? We don't know what we're dealing with here. If there's a human survivor down there, Commander, we can't just leave them, Reynolds replied. But maintain safe distance and keep our engines hot. At the first sign of trouble, we jump back to hyperspace. As the Endeavour moved closer to Zephyria Prime, the scale of the disaster became even more apparent. The organic mass covering the planet wasn't just sitting on the surface. It had actually integrated itself into the planet's structure. Crystal spires that had once reached kilometers into the sky were now twisted and corrupted. Their perfect geometric forms warped into something that looked disturbingly alive. The signal is coming from what used to be the capital city of Crystallos, Foster reported. But sir, the energy readings from that area are off the charts. Whatever that organic mass is, it's generating massive amounts of bioelectric energy. Can we transport someone down? Reynolds asked. Too much interference, replied Commander Patricia Walsh, the ship's chief engineer. The organic mass is generating some kind of field that's blocking our transporter systems. We'd have to send a shuttle. Reynolds weighed his options. Every instinct told him to retreat and report their findings to Earth Command, but the thought of abandoning a human survivor was unbearable.
Prep a shuttle.
Small team, full environmental suits, armed, but non-aggressive. I'll lead it myself. Sir, I should... Vasquez began. You have the ship, Elena. If anything happens to the shuttle team, you get the Endeavour back to Earth and report what we found. 30 minutes later, Reynolds found himself in a shuttle with Foster, Walsh, and 2 security officers descending through the thick, humid atmosphere of the corrupted world. The organic mass that covered the planet's surface looked even more disturbing up close. It pulsed with a rhythmic, heartbeat-like motion, and strange bioluminescent patterns raced across its surface like neural pathways firing in some massive brain. The air outside is toxic, Foster reported as they approached the landing site. High concentrations of methane, hydrogen sulfide, and several organic compounds we can't identify. Our suits will protect us, but we'll have limited time before the filters become overwhelmed. The shuttle touched down on what had once been a landing pad in the heart of Kristalos. The platform was still recognizable, but it was covered in a thick, writhing layer of the organic material. As they disembarked, Reynolds could feel the surface moving slightly under his feet, as if the entire planet had become one massive, living organism. The signal is coming from over there, Foster said, pointing toward what had once been the Zephyrian Council building. The magnificent crystal structure was still partially visible, but it was wrapped and twisted by the organic growth like a building being consumed by aggressive ivy. As they approached the building, their environmental suits picked up more disturbing readings. Captain, Walsh said, her voice tight with concern, I'm detecting trace amounts of Zephyrian DNA in the organic material. It's like the organism absorbed them and incorporated their genetic material into itself. Reynolds felt sick. The implications were horrifying. This wasn't just an invasion or an attack, it was absorption. The entire Zephyrian civilization hadn't just been killed, they had been consumed and integrated into some vast alien organism. There, Foster said, pointing to a partially collapsed entrance to the council building. The signal is definitely coming from inside. They made their way through the entrance, their helmet lights cutting through the humid darkness. The interior of the building was a nightmare fusion of crystal architecture and pulsing organic matter. The walls breathed. Veins of bioluminescent fluid pulsed through what had once been geometric crystal corridors. How is this possible? One of the security officers whispered. How can something be both alive and architectural? It's not just alive, Foster said, scanning the walls with his instruments. It's intelligent. These patterns, the way the organic material has integrated with the existing structures, it's not random. There's purpose here, design. They followed the emergency beacon signal deeper into the building until they reached what had once been the main council chamber. There, in the center of the room, they found the source of the human signal. It wasn't a survivor. It was the remains of Dr. Joe. Elizabeth Harper, a human xenobiologist who had been visiting the Zephyrian homeworld as part of a cultural exchange program. But she wasn't exactly dead, either. Her body was partially merged with the organic mass, tubes and tendrils connecting her to the larger organism. Her eyes were open and aware, but when she tried to speak, only a horrible gurgling sound emerged. My God, Walsh breathed, she's still alive. Reynolds stepped closer, fighting every instinct that screamed at him to run. Dr. Harper? Can you understand me? The woman's eyes focused on him with obvious effort. Her lips moved, and this time, words came out, though her voice was distorted and mechanical. Don't come closer. It knows you're here. What is it? Reynolds asked. What happened to the Zephyrians? Harvester, Harper gasped. Not from here. Uses biology against itself. Spreads through neural networks. Foster's scanner was going crazy. Captain, massive energy spike incoming. The entire organism is awakening. How do we stop it? Reynolds demanded. Harper's eyes widened with effort as she forced out more words. Can't stop. Can only avoid. Humans? Safe. No. Neural link. Primitive advantage. The chamber began to shake as the organic mass around them started moving with increasing agitation. Bioluminescent patterns raced across the walls like wildfire, and Reynolds could hear a sound like a massive heartbeat getting faster and faster. It's reacting to our presence, Foster shouted over the increasing noise. We need to go now. Wait, Reynolds said, turning back to Harper. How do we protect Earth? With tremendous effort, Harper managed one final message. Don't connect. Don't link. Stay primitive. Stay separate. As they ran back through the corrupted corridors toward their shuttle, Reynolds tried to process what Harper had told them. The organism, this harvester, somehow used species' own biology and neural networks against them. But humans were safe because they were primitive? Because they didn't have neural links? They reached the shuttle just as the entire planet seemed to convulse. The organic mass was writhing violently now, and massive tendrils began reaching up toward their small craft. Go, go, go! Reynolds shouted as they dove into the shuttle. Walsh had the engine spinning up before they even secured the hatch, and they rocketed upward through the toxic atmosphere. Behind them, the planet that had once been the crown jewel of Zephyrian civilization pulsed with malevolent life. As they reached orbit and prepared to dock with the Endeavour, Foster made one final scan of the system. "Captain," he said, his voice hollow with shock, "there are more energy signatures like this throughout the galaxy. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds." Reynolds stared at the tactical display showing the locations of similar organic masses throughout known space. Each one represented a dead civilization, consumed and absorbed by this cosmic horror that turned species' own advances against them. "Set course for Earth," he ordered. "Maximum hyperspace velocity." As the Endeavour jumped back into hyperspace, carrying the terrible news back to humanity's homeworld, Reynolds couldn't shake Harper's final words. Humans were safe because they were primitive. Their lack of advanced neural technology, their separation from each other, their chaotic and unconnected nature, all the things that other species had mocked them for, might be the only thing standing between humanity and the fate that had consumed the rest of the galaxy. But for how long? And what would humanity have to give up to stay primitive enough to survive? Doctor. Maria Santos stood before the emergency assembly of Earth's greatest scientific minds, her hands trembling slightly as she prepared to deliver findings that would change humanity's understanding of their place in the universe forever. The International Space Research Facility's main auditorium was packed with representatives from every major space agency, military organization, and research institution on Earth. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying across the silent room, "after 3 weeks of intensive analysis of the data brought back by Captain Reynolds and the Endeavour expedition, we have reached some disturbing conclusions about the nature of the entity that has consumed our galactic neighbors." The holographic display behind her showed a three-dimensional representation of the galaxy, with red markers indicating the locations where the organic masses, the harvesters, had been detected. The pattern was scattered but growing, like a disease spreading through the cosmic body of civilized space. The entity, which we are calling the Harvester based on Dr. Harper's final testimony, appears to be a form of collective organic intelligence that spreads by incorporating other biological forms into its structure. But this is not simple consumption or predation. The Harvester doesn't just eat other species. It absorbs their knowledge, their technology, and their biological capabilities. A murmur of unease rippled through the audience. General Patricia Adams, head of Earth Defense Command, leaned forward in her seat. "Dr. Santos, are you saying this thing learns from the species it destroys?" "Exactly, General. Each civilization the Harvester consumes makes it more powerful, more intelligent, and more capable. It's not just a predator, it's a collective consciousness that grows stronger with every species it absorbs." Dr. Chen Wei, director of the Beijing Institute of Xenobiology, raised his hand. "How does it spread? Our analysis of the timeline shows that civilizations across vast distances were affected simultaneously. That should be impossible given the laws of physics." Santos manipulated the holographic display to show the progression of the harvesters spread across the galaxy. This is where it gets truly terrifying. The harvester doesn't need to physically travel to each world. Instead, it appears to spread through technological networks, specifically through advanced neural interface systems that most civilizations use for communication and data transfer. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Dr. Yuki Tanaka from the Tokyo Institute of Technology spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you saying it spreads through their communication networks? Like a computer virus, but biological?" "Not exactly like a computer virus," Santos replied. "More like a consciousness virus. The Harvester infiltrates neural networks and begins converting the connected minds into extensions of itself. Once it has a foothold in a civilization's neural infrastructure, it can quickly overwhelm their entire population." Admiral Harrison, who had been listening intently from the front row, stood up. Dr. Santos, this still doesn't explain why humanity has been unaffected. We have global communication networks, internet systems, and various forms of digital connectivity. Santos smiled grimly. That's the remarkable part, Admiral. We've been spared because of what every other species has always considered our greatest weakness, our primitive, disconnected nature. She changed the display to show comparative neural network diagrams of various alien species versus humans. Look at the Zephyrians. Their entire population was connected through quantum crystalline neural interfaces from birth. Every individual was part of a collective consciousness that allowed instant communication and shared knowledge across their entire civilization. The Karathi had even more advanced systems. They could share thoughts, memories, and experiences directly through bioelectric neural networks. And the Vectani? Asked General Adams. Military neural links, Santos replied. Every warrior was connected to their unit, their commanders, and their tactical networks. They prided themselves on perfect coordination and instant battlefield communication. The display now showed a human brain, isolated and individual compared to the networked consciousness of the alien species. Humans, on the other hand, remain stubbornly individual. Yes, we have the internet and global communications, but our brains are not directly connected to these systems. We still communicate through crude interfaces, keyboards, voice commands, visual displays. We've never developed the neural interface technology that would allow direct brain-to-network connection. Doctor, Tanaka looked puzzled. But surely some human research groups have been working on neural interface technology. What about the military projects or the medical applications for paralyzed patients? Santos nodded. We've been monitoring those programs very carefully since the Endeavour returned. The few experimental neural interfaces that existed have been quietly shut down. Any research into direct brain-computer interfaces has been suspended indefinitely. Wait, interrupted Dr. Wei. Are you saying that our technological backwardness is actually protecting us? Precisely. Every other species in the galaxy has moved beyond individual consciousness towards some form of collective awareness. They saw it as the natural evolution of intelligence. Why struggle with the limitations of individual minds when you could share knowledge instantly across your entire species? But this collective consciousness is exactly what made them vulnerable to the Harvester. Santos changed the display again, this time showing the electromagnetic signatures of different planets. The Harvester appears to be a form of collective consciousness itself, but one that exists to absorb and integrate other forms of consciousness. It can only affect minds that are already connected to networks because it needs those pathways to spread. Individual, isolated consciousnesses like ours are essentially invisible to it. General Adams stood up, her expression troubled. Dr. Roll, Santos, this raises a critical question. If our primitive nature is protecting us, what happens if we continue to advance? What happens when we do develop neural interface technology? The room fell silent as everyone grasped the terrible implications of the question. Santos looked around at the assembled scientists and military leaders, seeing the same realization dawning in their eyes. That, General, is the dilemma we now face. To remain safe from the Harvester, humanity must essentially halt its technological advancement in certain areas. We must choose to remain primitive in the one field that every other species considered the hallmark of true intelligence, direct neural interface technology. Dr. Robert Sterling from the London Institute of Advanced Computing spoke up, his voice heavy with concern. But surely there must be some way to advance safely. Some form of protection we could develop. Santos shook her head. Based on our analysis of the remains found on Zephyria Prime and the other affected worlds, the Harvester has absorbed the knowledge and defensive capabilities of every species it has consumed. It now has access to millions of years of collective scientific advancement. Any protection we might develop, it has likely already encountered and overcome. So we're trapped, said Admiral Harrison. We can stay primitive and safe or advance and risk extinction. There may be another option, Santos said, bringing up a new display showing scattered energy signatures across the galaxy. Our long-range sensors have detected several isolated energy signatures that don't match the Harvester's organic profile. These appear to be artificial constructs, possibly automated systems, or even survivors who have managed to isolate themselves from their species' neural networks. One way, the display showed dozens of small, isolated signals scattered across the galaxy's spiral arms. Some appear to be space stations or ships, others seem to be planetary installations. You're suggesting there might be other survivors out there? Asked General Adams. Possibly. But if there are, they would have to be individuals or small groups who somehow managed to disconnect themselves from their species' collective consciousness before the harvester reached them. They would be outcasts, primitives by their own species standards. Dr. Tanaka leaned back in her chair, overwhelmed by the implications. So, the galaxy's survivors would be the misfits, the disconnected ones, the individuals who refused to join their species' collective advancement. Ironically, yes, the galaxy may now be populated entirely by primitives, us, and whoever else was too backwards or too stubborn to embrace the neural connectivity that their civilizations considered essential for advanced intelligence.
Admiral Harrison walked to the front of the room.
His expression grave. This information cannot leave this room. If the general population learned that our continued survival depends on remaining technologically primitive, it could cause panic and social collapse. Agreed, said General Adams. But we need to make some immediate policy decisions. Dr. Santos, what are your recommendations? Santos had been dreading this moment, knowing that her next words would fundamentally alter humanity's future. First, we need to immediately halt all research into direct neural interface technology. Any existing projects must be shut down and their research data secured. Second, we need to establish strict monitoring systems to detect any attempts at creating networked consciousness technologies. Third, we need to prepare for the possibility of contact with other survivors, species who may be more advanced than us, but who are now facing the same primitive survival requirements. And fourth? Asked Admiral Harrison. We need to decide whether humanity is willing to remain primitive forever, or whether we're going to find a way to fight back against the harvester. Because eventually, it's going to notice that one species survived its harvest, and when it does, our primitive nature may not be enough to protect us. The room erupted in discussions as scientists and military leaders debated the implications of Santos's revelations. Some argued for complete technological isolation, while others insisted that humanity needed to find a way to advance safely. In the midst of the chaos, Dr. Santos stared at the holographic display showing the scattered survivor signals across the galaxy. Somewhere out there, other species were facing the same terrible choice that now confronted humanity. The question was whether any of them would be willing to work together to find a solution, or whether they would all remain isolated in their primitive safety until the harvester found a way to reach them anyway. As the debates raged around her, Santos couldn't shake the feeling that humanity's greatest test was yet to come. They had survived the initial harvest by being too primitive to notice, but now they faced a far more difficult challenge. Staying primitive enough to survive, while somehow finding the strength to fight back against an enemy that had absorbed the collective knowledge of thousands of advanced civilizations. The age of human advancement was over. The age of primitive survival had begun. 3 months after the emergency scientific assembly, Captain Sarah Chen received a transmission that would change everything. She was conducting routine patrol scans from the Earth Defense Station when her communications officer detected something that shouldn't have existed, a coherent signal coming from the direction of the Andorian system, where the peaceful Andorian Federation had been declared extinct weeks ago. "Captain, this is impossible," Lieutenant Webb said, staring at his instruments in disbelief. "I'm receiving a transmission from Andorian space, but it's not using Andorian communication protocols. The signal structure is primitive." Sarah hurried to his station, her heart racing. Any sign of life in the dead galaxy was significant, but a primitive signal from an advanced alien system was unprecedented. "Can you decode it?" she asked. Webb worked frantically at his console. "It's using basic mathematics and simple binary patterns, almost like something designed to be understood by any intelligence regardless of their technological level. A first contact protocol? Possibly. But why would someone use first contact protocols in a system that's been inhabited for thousands of years?" The answer came through the speakers a moment later, as Webb successfully decoded the transmission. The voice was clearly Andorian, but speaking in heavily accented standard human rather than their native language. "This is Kethmar of the Andorian research vessel Solitude, calling any survivors who might be listening. My crew and I managed to escape our homeworld before the harvester consumed our people. We are searching for other survivors. If you can hear this, please respond." Sarah felt a surge of hope mixed with caution. The existence of Andorian survivors was wonderful news, but the fact that they were using primitive communication methods suggested they had learned the same harsh lessons about survival that humanity had. "Open a channel," she ordered. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of Earth Defense Command. Kethmar, we're receiving you. Are you truly Andorian survivors?" The reply came back quickly, and Sarah could hear the relief in the alien voice. "Captain Chen, yes, we are survivors. 4 ships, 37 individuals total. We have been wandering the galaxy for months, searching for any sign that we are not alone. How did you escape? Sarah asked. Our understanding is that the harvester consumed entire planetary populations almost simultaneously. We were outcasts, Kethmar replied with what sounded like bitter irony. My research group was studying what we called primitive consciousness, the individual awareness that existed before our species developed neural linking technology. Our government considered it a waste of resources, studying obsolete mental states. They refused to fund our research and eventually exiled us from Andorian space. Sarah felt a chill of recognition. You were disconnected from your species' neural networks? Completely isolated. We had to remove our neural implants and learn to live as individuals again. It was difficult. Most Andorians cannot function without the constant presence of the collective consciousness. But our isolation is what saved us when the harvester came. Kethmar, we need to meet. There are things we need to discuss about the nature of the harvester and what it means for survivors like us. Agreed, Captain Chen. But we must be cautious. We have detected harvester activity increasing throughout this sector. It appears to be searching for something. Sarah's blood ran cold. Searching for what? For us, Captain. For the survivors. We believe it has become aware that some minds escaped its initial harvest, and now it is actively hunting for the remnants. The meeting took place 3 days later at a predetermined coordinate in deep space, far from any star system that might harbor harvester activity. Sarah commanded a small fleet consisting of the Earth Defense Station and 2 escort vessels, while Kethmar arrived with his collection of modified Andorian research ships. The first face-to-face meeting between the human and Andorian survivors took place aboard the neutral ground of Sarah's station. Kethmar was tall and graceful in the typical Andorian manner, but there was something different about him compared to the Andorian Sarah had met before, where other Andorians had moved with the fluid coordination of beings connected to a collective consciousness. Kethmar moved with the slightly awkward independence of an individual mind. Captain Chen, he said, extending a 3-fingered hand in the human gesture of greeting rather than the traditional Andorian touching of foreheads. It is a relief to finally meet another survivor.
The feeling is mutual, Sarah replied, shaking his hand.
Your message mentioned that there might be other survivors out there. Kethmar nodded and activated a holographic display showing the galaxy with dozens of scattered energy signatures. We have been monitoring communication frequencies used by various species before the harvest. Over the past months, we have detected signals from at least 12 different locations. Most are too weak or too brief to establish contact, but they suggest that survivors exist across multiple species. Dr. Rodriguez, who had joined the meeting as Earth's representative scientist, studied the display intently. What do they have in common, these survivor signals? All of them are using primitive communication methods, Kethmar replied. Radio waves, basic digital signals, mathematical sequences. Nothing that requires neural interface technology. So they're all disconnected from their species' advanced networks, Sarah concluded. Yes, and that brings us to a disturbing pattern we've observed. Kethmar changed the display to show movement patterns of the harvester masses across the galaxy. The harvester is no longer simply consuming worlds randomly. It appears to be systematically investigating areas where these primitive signals have been detected. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. It's hunting survivors. More than that, said Kethmar's science officer, a younger Andorian named Veltar. We believe it's learning to detect primitive consciousness. Each time it investigates a survivor signal, it becomes more efficient at finding the next one. How is that possible? Asked Rodriguez. We were told that primitive consciousness was invisible to the harvester. Kethmar's expression grew grim. That was true initially, but remember, Captain, the harvester absorbs the knowledge and capabilities of every species it consumes. It now has access to millions of years of collective scientific advancement. It is adapting. Sarah felt the cold grip of despair. So our primitive nature won't protect us forever? No. We estimate that within 6 months to a year, the harvester will develop the capability to detect and consume individual consciousness as easily as it currently consumes collective consciousness. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed this information. Their salvation had always been temporary, but now they had a timeline for when even that protection would fail. There's something else, Veltar said quietly. We've been analyzing the energy signatures of the harvester masses, and we've discovered something disturbing. They're not just absorbing species, they're experimenting. Experimenting how? Sarah asked. Each harvester mass shows evidence of incorporating different aspects of the species it has consumed. Some focus on technological advancement, others on biological adaptation, still others on pure consciousness expansion. But recently, we've detected something new. The holographic display changed to show a particularly large energy signature near the galactic core. This harvester mass is different from the others. It appears to be synthesizing the capabilities of all the species it has absorbed into something new. Something that we believe is designed specifically to hunt primitive consciousness. Rodriguez stared at the display. A specialized hunter? We think so. And our calculations suggest it will be ready to deploy within months. Sarah stood up and walked to the viewport, staring out at the stars that now seemed far less welcoming than they had just hours ago. So what do? We can't advance without making ourselves vulnerable to the original harvester, but if we stay primitive, this new hunter will find us anyway. There may be another option, Kethmar said, but it would require cooperation between all surviving species, and it would be extremely dangerous. What kind of option? We fight back, but not with advanced technology, and not by trying to match the harvester's collective consciousness. We use the one advantage that individual minds have always had over collective ones, which is unpredictability. Chaos. The ability to act irrationally and make decisions that no collective intelligence could anticipate. Sarah turned back to face the group. You're talking about guerrilla warfare against a cosmic entity that has absorbed thousands of civilizations. Yes, but consider this. Every species the harvester has consumed was logical, predictable, and collective in their thinking. They all responded to threats in rational, coordinated ways. They followed patterns that a sufficiently advanced intelligence could anticipate and counter. Veltar picked up the explanation. But individual consciousness is different. Humans make decisions based on emotion, intuition, and personal experience. And Orions who have disconnected from the collective develop idiosyncratic thought patterns that even other Andorians can't predict. These traits were considered flaws by our respective civilizations, but they might be exactly what we need to confuse and disrupt the harvester. You're suggesting that our primitive chaos is a weapon? Rodriguez asked. Not just a weapon, Kethmar said. A weapon that the harvester can't adapt to because adaptation requires understanding, and individual consciousness is fundamentally incomprehensible to a collective entity. Sarah felt a spark of hope for the first time in months. It was a desperate plan, and the odds against success were astronomical, but it was better than simply waiting for extinction. What would we need to do? First, we need to contact all the other survivors and convince them to work together. Second, we need to develop tactics that exploit the chaotic nature of individual consciousness while avoiding the technological traps that make us vulnerable to harvesting. Third, we need to find a way to strike at the harvester before it completes its specialized hunter. Sarah looked around the room at the faces of humans and Andorians who had already sacrificed everything to survive. They were outcasts and primitives, the rejects of their respective civilizations, but they might be the galaxy's only hope. All right, she said. Let's see if chaos can defeat order. But first, we need to gather every survivor we can find. If we're going to fight the most powerful entity in the galaxy, we're going to need every primitive mind we can get. 6 months after first contact with the Andorian survivors, Captain Sarah Chen stood in the command center of what had become known as the Remnant Alliance, a collection of primitive spacecraft and isolated space stations housing the galaxy's last free minds. The hodgepodge fleet represented 17 different species, all connected by their shared experience of being outcasts from their own civilizations and survivors of the harvester's consumption. The diversity was staggering and heartbreaking. There were Karathi researchers who had deliberately severed their neural connections to study defunct individual consciousness, Vectani warriors who had been dishonorably discharged for refusing military neural implants, Zephyrian artists who had rejected their species' collective aesthetic in favor of personal expression. Even a few members of species that humanity had never encountered before the harvest, beings who had somehow managed to escape their worlds before the harvester consumed them. All told, the Remnant Alliance consisted of fewer than 3,000 individuals scattered across 47 ships and installations. Against the cosmic force that had consumed trillions of beings across thousands of worlds, they seemed pathetically insignificant. But they had something that no other force in the galaxy possessed: absolute unpredictability. Status report, Sarah called out as the various species representatives gathered in the main briefing chamber. The room itself was a testament to their primitive nature. Jury-rigged communication systems, mismatched furniture from a dozen different civilizations, and air recyclers that worked through pure mechanical determination rather than elegant efficiency. Kethmar, who had become the Alliance's unofficial coordinator, activated a holographic display showing their target. The specialized hunter that we detected near the galactic core is complete and beginning to move. Our long-range sensors indicate it's approximately 1,000 times larger than the standard harvester masses, and its energy signature suggests it contains the collective knowledge of every species that has been consumed. A Vectani warrior named Thopgren, whose massive frame was covered in ritual scars from his dishonoring, growled his displeasure. How do we fight something that size? Our entire fleet could be consumed in seconds. We don't fight it directly, replied Dr. Bagar. Zilneth, a Karathi who had removed his species' neural implants decades ago to study what he called the loneliness of individual thought, his voice carried the strange isolation that came with being the only member of his species to exist without connection to others. Direct confrontation would be logical, predictable. The hunter would anticipate and counter any conventional attack. Then what do you suggest? Asked Captain Miranda Okafor, one of the human representatives who commanded a retrofitted cargo vessel that had become home to 73 survivors from multiple species. Sarah stepped forward, feeling the weight of leadership for this impossible mission. We've spent months studying the behavioral patterns of both the original harvester masses and this new hunter.
They all operate on the principle of logical absorption. They encounter a civilization, analyze its capabilities, and then consume it using the most efficient methods available.
The hunter is specifically designed to track and consume primitive consciousness, added Veltar, the young Endorian scientist.
But its targeting systems are based on logical assumptions about how primitive minds behave. It expects us to run, to hide, to try to protect ourselves through isolation or defense. Thopgren's battle-scarred face twisted into what might have been a smile. So we do the opposite. We attack. Not just attack, Sarah said. We do something completely irrational. We divide our forces, act independently, and create as much chaos as possible. The hunter can process millions of variables simultaneously, but it can't predict actions that make no logical sense. The plan they had developed over months of desperate collaboration was indeed chaotic. Rather than coordinating their efforts, each ship and station would act independently according to their own species' most irrational cultural patterns. Human ships would make decisions based on emotion and personal grudges. Endorian survivors would follow artistic inspiration rather than tactical sense. Vectani warriors would seek glorious individual combat rather than strategic advantage. Korathi researchers would pursue knowledge even at the cost of safety. The beauty of this approach, Dr. Zilneth explained, is that even we don't know what we're going to do. If we can't predict our own actions, how can the hunter? There's something else, said a new voice. Yixtal, a survivor from a species called the Nethrim that had been known for their sophisticated probability mathematics, stepped forward. She was one of only 5 members of her species to survive, and only because she had been exiled for developing what her people called chaos mathematics. Probability calculations that included random, irrational factors. My calculations suggest that the hunter's biggest weakness is its need to understand and categorize threats before responding to them. If we can present it with a sufficiently chaotic situation, we might be able to overload its analytical systems. How? Asked Captain Okafor. By being more random than any intelligence should be able to survive, Yixtal replied. My people always said that chaos mathematics was useless, because no rational being would ever act according to pure randomness. But we're not rational anymore. We're survivors. The attack began 2 weeks later, across 17 different star systems simultaneously. The Alliance had deliberately scattered their forces to prevent any coordinated response, but had timed their actions to occur within the same general time frame to maximize confusion. Sarah found herself commanding a mixed group of human, Endorian, and Korathi ships in the Rigel system, where one of the larger harvester masses was located. True to their plan, she made decisions based purely on emotional impulse rather than tactical logic. When her science officer recommended attacking the harvester mass's energy centers, she ordered them to target what looked like the most beautiful part of its structure instead. When conventional wisdom suggested retreating after taking damage, she ordered a full-speed charge directly into the organism's core. The results were immediate and startling. The harvester mass, which had efficiently consumed the entire Rigelian civilization in a matter of hours, seemed genuinely confused by the Alliance's chaotic tactics. Its responses were delayed, inconsistent, and occasionally completely absent, as it struggled to process actions that violated every principle of intelligent behavior. It's working, reported her tactical officer as they watched the massive organic structure writhe in apparent confusion. The harvester is trying to analyze our attack patterns, but we don't have any patterns to analyze. Meanwhile, in the Deneb system, Thopgren was leading a group of dishonored Vectani warriors in what could only be described as a berserker charge against a harvester mass 3 times the size of their entire force. Instead of using weapons or tactics, they were ramming their ships directly into the organism while broadcasting ancient Vectani war songs. The Harvester, designed to counter military strategies, had no response protocol for what was essentially cosmic suicide with musical accompaniment. Dr. Zielmeth was pursuing his own form of irrational behavior in the Procyon system, using his research vessel to conduct scientific experiments on live harvester tissue while under fire. His actions made no tactical sense. He was endangering his ship and crew to gather data that might have no practical application. But the Harvester's defensive systems kept hesitating because they couldn't determine whether his actions represented an attack, a retreat, or something else entirely. The coordinated chaos continued across all 17 systems, with each alliance group following their own species' most irrational behavioral patterns. The cumulative effect was something the galaxy had never seen, a military campaign that succeeded through pure unpredictability. But the real test came when the Hunter itself finally responded. The massive entity moved through hyperspace with terrifying speed, arriving in the Alpha Centauri system, where Sarah had relocated after her successful confusion of the Rigel Harvester mass. The Hunter was unlike anything they had encountered before. Where the regular harvester masses were organic and flowing, the Hunter was geometric and precise, its structure incorporating architectural elements from every civilization it had absorbed. It was a monument to collective intelligence, a perfect synthesis of rational thought and technological advancement. "It's beautiful," whispered Veltar as they watched the massive entity emerge from hyperspace. "It's death," Sarah replied. "All sensors active scan. I want to know everything about that thing." But before her crew could complete their scans, the Hunter began to speak, not through conventional communication, but by directly projecting thoughts and images into the minds of everyone in the Alliance fleet. Sarah felt her consciousness invaded by a presence vast and alien, yet somehow familiar. Primitives. The Hunter's voice resonated through her mind. "Your chaotic behavior has been noted and analyzed. We understand your strategy now. Random actions based on emotional impulses and irrational cultural patterns. Clever, but ultimately futile." Sarah gritted her teeth against the mental intrusion. "Maybe we're not as random as you think. Your thoughts betray you, human. Even now you are following predictable patterns. Individual consciousness always returns to the same fundamental drives: survival, protection of offspring, tribal loyalty. We have absorbed the knowledge of every species that ever existed. We know you better than you know yourselves." But even as the Hunter spoke, Sarah realized something crucial. The entity was trying to understand them, trying to fit their behavior into logical categories. That meant it still saw them as a puzzle to be solved rather than a threat to be eliminated. "You're wrong," she broadcast back, opening the communication channel to include the entire Alliance fleet. "You think you understand individual consciousness because you've absorbed collective knowledge about it. But the thing about individual minds is that they're not just unpredictable. They're unique. Every single one of us thinks differently, feels differently, acts differently. You can't absorb that because there's nothing to absorb. It's not knowledge, it's existence." Across the fleet, the other survivors began to understand. They stopped trying to be random and started being themselves. Thokran abandoned his berserker tactics and began fighting with the precise, honorable style that had made him a great warrior before his dishonoring. Dr. Zilneth stopped conducting meaningless experiments and started using his vast scientific knowledge in creative, unexpected ways. Ixtal's chaos mathematics suddenly became elegant and purposeful as she calculated probability cascades that no collective intelligence could follow. The Hunter, designed to counter chaos, found itself facing something far more dangerous: authenticity. Millions of unique individuals acting according to their own personal natures, their own experiences, their own hopes and fears and dreams. For the first time since the harvest began, a collective intelligence found itself unable to predict, counter, or absorb the behavior of individual minds. The Hunter's perfect geometric form began to waver as it struggled to process patterns that weren't patterns, behaviors that weren't behaviors, but simply the expression of free consciousness.
"This is impossible." The Hunter's voice carried a note of something that might have been confusion or even fear.
"Individual consciousness cannot be this complex. That's because you've never actually encountered it before," Sarah replied as she watched the massive entity begin to retreat. "Every species you absorbed had already given up their individual nature for collective consciousness. You've been fighting copies and shadows. We're the real thing." The Hunter withdrew from the Alpha Centauri system, but the Alliance knew this was only the beginning. Across the galaxy, word of their impossible victory began to spread through the primitive communication networks that connected the scattered survivors. For the first time since the harvest began, the galaxy's last free minds had hope. They were still outnumbered by trillions to one. They were still primitive by the standards of the civilizations they had come from, but they had something that no collective intelligence, no matter how advanced, could ever possess or understand. They had themselves.